30周年なんですよ。で、日本の方でもかなり盛り上がって、30周年に特化したイベントが東京と大阪で行われています。
This year has been the 30th anniversary of Ronin Warriors, and there are actually several large events commemorating that anniversary, one in Tokyo and one in Osaka, and I've been enjoying those and was attending both of them.
新たなサムライトルーパーのファンも増えてきてます。
And actually, I think that maybe the show has gained more fans over the years.
それは中学や高校の時にサムライトルーパーを見てた人たちがお母さんになってその子供が見るようになったから。
I think it's because people who were in middle school or high school when they first watched the show have now grown up and had children, so they become mothers now if they were girls watching the show, and now their kids are into it as well. サムライトルーパー、アメリカではどうなんですか？ So, how is Samurai Troopers Ronin Warriors received in the U.S.? Why are you all here?
Yeah. Well, how should I? Whatever.
Is there a panel moderator actually who could be running the wireless mic around again? Thank you so much.
So I started watching this show when I was in like 4th grade or something. It aired on Toonami, which is just the American television block. It was a lot of fun. It called to mind a lot of things like Power Rangers or Super Sentai, and I was always into those shows at that age, and seeing that show, yeah, I was excited to see it come on just about every day, until, unfortunately, my parents found out and said it was too violent and took it away. So.
毎日楽しみにしていて、両親が怒ってしまって、もう見てなくなっていました。
でもサムライトルーパーの必殺技ってどこ切ってるかよくわかんないんですけどね。必殺技が。
Yes, that's right. So perhaps your parents saw the sure kill moves being used by the Russians. And thought that that was too violent. Those are quite interesting. It's unclear where those came from.
じゃあサムライトルーパーの誕生からいきましょうか。もともとヒーマンっていうキャラクターがあったんです、アメリカで。それを日本版で発売するっていう企画がありまして、でそれをヒーマンみたいなシリーズをプロレスのキャラクターに置き換えてやろうって言ったのが最初のきっかけなんです。
So let me tell you a little bit about how Ronin Warriors was started. Where did the concept come from, and how is this show made? You may be familiar with the American cartoon character He-Man. There were talks about making a Japanese version of He-Man. And it was decided that that would be a pro wrestling show. It would have some of the same characters, but it would be pro wrestling.
担当が僕もそうなんですけど、時代劇とか大好きなんで、その侍の要素を入れてまとめたのが侍。
And the project lead actually loved period dramas, and so do I. I love period dramas, samurai dramas. He contacted me, and it ended up becoming Ronin Warriors.
一番最初の商品ってバネが入ってる。バネが入ってるそのキャラクタートイが発売されたんです。中に入ってバネでビヨーンってなる。スプリングだ。スプリング。
So one of the characters would have had springs in their arms or springs in their armor.
それが僕はすごい嫌でしょうがなかった。バネを取ってくれって何回も揉めました。
And I really hated the idea of those springs. So I said, you have to remove, I can't do it. I hate those springs. We got to take them off that character. And it was a fight that we ended up having over and over between us.
そのバネを入れようって言った人が、実は虫プロっていう鉄アトムのアニメーターの人だったんですよ。で、ジャングル大帝とか、サブと1とか原画を描いてた人。
The person that I kept having that argument about springs with was involved in Mushi Pro, an animation studio that created Tetsuan Atom and Jungle Emperor Leo, and some of these extremely famous early animes. That person had drawn key animations for those shows. 沼本清っていう人で、その沼本さんの後輩に当たる人が安彦義和とか、それから荒木慎吾があって、うちセントセイヤのキャラクターデザインをしてるんですけど、その2人がいて、サムライとルーパーもどっちかにやらせるんだっていう。 So that person, their name was Mimoto Kiyomi. And working underneath them were a couple of people who would go on to design the characters for Saint Seiya. One was named Yasuhiko, one named Araki. And so they were told, one of you needs to do Samurai Troopers, Ronin Warriors.
それはまずいだろうっていうことでやめてボトムズを書いているキャラクターデザイナーの塩山さんにお願いした。キャラクターデザインをしてなってしまう。
Both of them refused. So instead the character design went to a person named Shioyama-san, who unfortunately has lately passed away. And so the actual character design was done by Shioyama-san.
今いろいろサンライズのいろいろ揉めてっていうかいろいろアイデアを出し合ってアニメが生まれたっていう。
And other folks in Sunrise were also involved, and there was a lot of really active discussion, by which I hesitate to describe it as arguments or fighting. There were a lot of ideas really actively shared, and at the end of all of that, we came up with Ronin Warriors.
Ronin っていう意味わかりますか？
Does everybody know what the word Ronin means?
Yeah.
It means samurai with no master.
侍っていうのはそうですね。だからそうなんですよ。だから騎士官の先がない人たちになっちゃったんですよ。
So the original meaning of that word Ronin, because it comes from samurai who have lost their liege lord, would be people who are like completely abandoned and have absolutely nowhere to go.
ちょっとイメージが違っちゃって。
I think there might be a little bit of a different nuance when it's brought into English.
いや、サンライズっていうそのアニメの会社はガンダムに代表されるようにすごくリアルなアニメを作るのが得意としてるところだったんです。それなんでサムライトルパに出てくるアラ五条だとか、それからそのサムライ領たちが変身する武装っていうのはものすごい抵抗があったんです。それをやるっていうのは。
So Sunrise Studio at the time was known as a studio that was extremely good at creating realistic anime. So for example, the Gundam series was an example of realism. brought into anime, and Sunrise was just the manifestation of doing that really, really well. When you come to look at Ronin warriors, so there's Talpa's castle. That is definitely not realistic. There is the way that all of the warriors put on their armor and how the armor looks once they put it on. That's also not very realistic. And so there's actually a lot of resistance within the studio against those two ideas and all of the fantastical elements of the show.
トルパの変身って多分皆さん分かるけど反物が舞ったりだとかそれからその本当にあるんだかない新宿にその荒子城が出てきたりあれを理解させるのがものすごい大変で机ひっくり返したりとか喧嘩になったりとかいっぱいありました。
I hope that all of you have been able to see it so that you are able to imagine this as I describe it. But for example, in the magical armor transformation scenes, there's some cuts where there are scrolls thrown up in the air, really distinctive cuts during that transformation. There, in the first season, above Shinjuku, the netherworld appears, and Talbot's castle is displayed as sort of floating in the air above Shinjuku. Describing these elements of the setting was extremely difficult, and they would come back and say, no, you have to remake that, recreate it, change it, do something else. And so it ended up having a lot of arguments about those elements.
近くの喫茶店で本当に机ひっくり返すぐらい喧嘩になるんですよ。で、ある時にその喫茶店行ったらひっくり返せないぐらいでっかい机になってたんですよ。そういう中の喫茶店の机が割とひっくり返しやすい机だったんですね。で、みんながひっくり返しちゃうんで、そう頑丈なテーブルになってる。
It became so active. There is a cafe that we all like to go to when we were discussing these matters. And the cafe actually had some tables that were really easy to turn over. And you may have heard of the expression where you flip the tea table when you're having a big argument. We ended up overturning those tables a few times, and they actually swapped out the table that we sat at, so it was a really stiff, thick one that we You may not realize it, but there's an awful lot of fighting and blood and tears that went into creating our reporters.
そうですね。最初のこのサムライトレッカーってそのレッカが今の見るとレッカっていうのが主人公なんですけど、もともとは混合の鎧が主人公だった。混合の衆がメインキャラクター。
Okay, so now I'm going to share with you some stories about designing the armors. So, as you watch the show now, you'll realize that Ro of the Wildfire is the main character. But originally, it was going to be Kento of Stone. His armor was going to be the main character's armor, and he was going to be the main character.
で、やっていくうちにやっぱり主人公は空を飛ぶイメージといいますか、飛行機のデザインの鎧の中にデザインを取り入れたんです。劣化の鎧。
And one of the images that helped me when I was designing the armor of Wildfire, Joe's armor, was the image of flying through the sky. So I actually took some elements from planes, from plane design, and used that in his armor.
後ろからその飛行機の洋服っていうかそれをデザインに入ってで肩が大きかったりして。
For example, if you were to look at his armor from behind, the shoulder projections are really large, and that's something that is a bit similar to like a plane's wings or a plane's tail if you were to look at it.
最初 今少年たちがその5人になってたんですけど、僕らが考えてるのは戦国バサラみたいなやつで、大人の戦いみたいなのをメインに考えてたんで、この間自分のツイッターでも質問があったんで書いたんですけど、政治の鎧っていうのがここに丸いのがついてるんですよ、肩に。あれは何だっていう話になって、でこれは自害するためのものなんです。敵に囲まれてもうこれ以上戦えないってなった時に侍だと切腹するんで、それ切腹できないんで、自害するための爆弾が両肩についてる。
So the show Ronin Warriors ended up being about the 5 main characters. So 5 the young boys, they're around 14 or so. But when we had originally planned it, we thought that there would actually be more characters and it would be a little bit more adult focused, like Sengoku Basara. So it would be like more of an adult story, that kind of unfolding. And a few days ago, I was asked a question on Twitter by somebody who was watching the show and looking at Sage's armor, which has some round things at the shoulders. And the person asked me on Twitter, what are those round things for? What part of that is on? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sage's armor. So the armor of Halo has round things on the shoulders. And I told him, those are actually self-destruct devices. So as samurai, if you are surrounded by the enemy and have no way to get out, you might have committed seppuku back in the Warring States period. And he's not able to commit seppuku, so instead he has bombs attached to his shoulders, which he would use if necessary.
Oh my god.
So now we are happy to start the audience Q&A portion of the panel. And so if any of you have questions, yep, raise your hand like the person in the black jacket, and the wonderful panel moderator will get you the microphone.
Hi, good afternoon. I had another question about the armor itself and its design. I guess moving from the shoulder bombs. I always noticed as a kid, especially when I was collecting these action figures also, that the characters had these strange hooks on the back of their heels. And I never understood what those are for. And I would love to ask you what those are all for, other than just getting grabbed and swung around. So that is my question. Thank you.
のデザインに感じてるんですけど、僕は子供の頃からフィギュアを集めていたんですけど、そのフィギュアの彼女にはフックみたいなものがあって、それは一体何のために？
いい質問です。いい質問ですね。
That's a great question.
あれはまず技をかけるんですよ。国土そういうのを取り入れた技をかけるためのすごいフックであったり、あといろんな乗り物が出てくる予定だったんですよ。その乗り物って言いますか、馬の例えば鞍のところに引っ掛けるフックがあるんです。それをガシャッとはまって乗り物と一体化させるための突起物だった。
So there was actually plans for possibly having vehicles or animals with tack that the Ronin warriors would ride. So for example, if you had a horse that had a special saddle, then those hooks would sort of click into place on the saddle or on the vehicle that the Ronin warrior was riding, and that was the original purpose of those hooks at the heels of the armor.
動物その乗り物がやっぱり出なくなっちゃったんでそこの役があんまり立たなくなっちゃった。
There ended up not being very many vehicles or even that many animals that are ridden in the show, and so those hooks were not actually ever used, but that was the intended purpose. Next question.
Hi. I was really curious. So, Ronin Warriors was actually the very first anime I can possibly remember watching. I was just old enough to sit in front of the TV. And so, growing up with that being something that I was really affectionate about, I was wondering what it was like to see all of these kids grow up in Japan be so, I guess, so attached and like really emotional over these characters that you designed, and like what was that like?
私自身の初めての強いアニメなのは少年文化でして、そしてなんか日本の子供がスマイルとかを見て、それも感動になって、それはまさに感じてどんな気分の思いますでしょうか。
はい。講談社のコミックボンボンっていう雑誌に載っかったんですけど、ものすごい投稿が多くて、子供たちから。自分で考えたその鎧だとか武器だとか、そういうのがね、毎週段ボール箱に3杯分ぐらい来てたんで、本当に嬉しかった。で、1話が始まった頃に、ちょうど女性ファンが増えて、いきなり1話が終わった後、同人誌が届いた。
That was actually a really amazing feeling. While the anime was airing and when it was new, the publisher, Kodansha, had a corner, Comic Bonbon, where children could submit their own armor designs or weapon designs. And we would receive a huge amount of these designs that kids had worked on and sent in to share with us. It would be something like 3 cardboard boxes worth every week would be coming to the studio, and we'd get a chance to see what these kids had made. Later on in the show, the number of female fans really increased. And so as soon as it stopped airing, actually, they started making dojinshi. And we started receiving dojinshi in these cardboard boxes that fan comics about the characters.
初号支社ってあるんですアニメを検定する。東京現状でやるんですけど、その時も出待ちとかに、はい、女性ファンとか来てて、出待ちなんです待ってる。
And in some of the publicity events that were done for the show, we actually noticed that there was a lot of female attendees who had come to get autographs or who had come to meet staff from the show. And that was interesting for us.
特別に当時上映会とかやったんですけど、もうキャラクターが出てくると失神しちゃう女の子が何人もいて、救急車で運ばれて、それがニュースになったこともある。特別に上映会をやったんですよ、それで上映会をやって、でその上映するキャラクターが出てくると、バラバラバラで倒れちゃって、でそれで救急車で運ばれて、ニュースになったりするから。
It was actually so popular at the time that during some of the publicity events, when people voicing certain characters or certain characters came up on screen, we had some of the attendees actually fainting and in an ambulance. And this was covered by the news organizations at the time, like the Beatles or something. Next question. It's actually way far in the back end.
When I was watching the show, a couple of times across the years I got wondering, but I always forget to look up, and I've got you here, so I wanted to ask. The 5 Ronin warriors each have a different symbol on their armor. Where did those symbols come from, and what do they mean?
家紋のことですよね。日本には鎧 本当の鎧っていうのに家紋ってつける、あ、そうじゃないや、一家、家族、家紋っていうものがあるんですけど、それを鎧の中に取り入れるということで、より家計という大事につながるっていう証明のために家紋が。
So you're talking about the crests that are on the armor.
Yes.
So those are similar to real Japanese armor. When people would put it on and go to fight, they would be fighting as representatives of a noble family usually, and it would be the family crest that was put on the armor. The reason that we've incorporated it into the armor designs for Ronin warriors is to show that each of these characters comes from a family. They have inherited the armor. It has been passed down through their family, and they actually have a long lineage that they can fall back on, basically. And that's why we've kept the crests on their armor.
Hi there. I noticed, like, in a lot of anime of the time that there haven't been, like, villains with, like, the same powers, but with, like, Topo and his henchmen, they have armors as well. Was that always the plan from the get-go, or were there others that were supposed to be incorporated and so on?
そうですね。監督の池田さんが考えて作った設定です。僕よりもそのアニメを完結させる大きな流れとしてそれを作った。
Yes, that was planned from the start, that we wanted to have both the heroes and the armors would have armor, heroes and villains would have armor, and that in fact it would have similar powers on both the hero and the villain side. That was an idea that came to us from director Ikeda, who had more influence than me in talking to all the different folks who involved the different roles on the show and bringing the show together in massaging its final form, basically. But yes, that was his idea, and it was planned from the start.
Hello, and thank you for coming. I really loved this show growing up. I watched it a lot, and I think remakes are really popular right now, and everything is getting remade, and Hollywood is buying into a lot of Japanese franchises. Do you have a desire to see a remake of Samurai Troopers, or what would your ideal kind of remake be if it was recreated? Thank you.
あ サムライトレバーのリメイクの話なんですけど、これまで何回も話がありました。で、スポンサーであるバンダイっていう店なんですけど、それからサムライトレバーの本来の宝っていうところで話し合いをするんですけど、その度ごとにね、くだらない問題が発生するんですよ。でどっちのおもちゃの技術が優れてるかね、揉めるんです。それでいつも台無しになってる。3回ぐらいありました。
So there have actually been a number of times talks about making a remake of Ronin Warriors. But every single time they get caught up on stupid arguments, unfortunately. So there are several sponsors involved. There's Bandai and there's Takara, who was one of the sponsors of the original show. And they love to talk about the ideas and toss the ideas around. But they end up having like petty disagreements that unfortunately have sunk it every time so far. It has been brought up about 3 times.
サムライトレバーの実写やるんだったら、やっぱり自分がやりたいなって、監督は自分がやりたいなと思ってます。
But of course, ideally, let's say there was a live-action remake of Ronin Warriors. I would love to direct it myself. I would enjoy that part.
今 3D プリンターっていうものができて、かなり鎧を薄く再現できることが最近になって技術の向上でできるので、かなりアニメとか自分がデザインした鎧の再現率が高いので、そういうのをやりたいな。
Because of the rise of 3D printers, it is now possible to take some of the armors I've designed and actually recreate them in real life with pretty thin materials, which wasn't possible before. Now that we have the technology and it has become sort of possible to recreate these things, that's something that I think would be great if it was possible to ever do it. Ever try that?
4月、今月から始まったんですけど、鎧のデザインの新しい番組でゲットっていう番組と、それから、来月、自分が映画撮る予定なんですけど、はや太郎っていうのがありまして、犬のサムライトルーパーっていう、それはやります。ゲットってね、ゲットっていうウサギの鎧、それが4月で始まったんですけど、それはデザインだけなんですけど、そのはや太郎っていうのは実際に自分が監督してやるという、それも鎧が出てきます。
Starting in April, there's actually a show called Get, and I was involved in that by doing designs, and that involves dogs, and it's sort of like, what if all the Ronin warriors were dogs? And starting next month, there's a show called Hayatoro, which I'm actually the director of, and of course that has armor as well, of course.
Obviously, this series has been successful because 30 years after the initial run, we're still here talking about it. Can you recall a moment back in the past when you saw the series and you thought this is going to be a success, this is going to last for years?
サムライトルーパーは今でも結構人気のあるものでして、熊野さんは最近のアニメとかを見たり、そのアニメどういうことが一目で結構成功になるような印象を与えたものがありますでしょうか。
今ちょうど自分で本当にいろんな作品が自分の作品決まってきちゃったんで、人の作品は見てないです。で今自分のことで精一杯になって、実際に今作業が始まってる感じなので、見てないです。 やっぱりどうなんですかね。どうなんだろう。もっとこうすればよかったなっていうのがいっぱいありますよ。
Yes, there's not really any one time when I looked at Ronin Warriors and thought, oh, this is going to be big, and this one is going to stick around and still be talked about 30 years from now. There's a lot of times when I look at it and think, oh, I wish I could go back and change that or fix that. As far as other shows that I've watched lately and thought they might become really, really good, I unfortunately don't have enough time to watch very many other people's shows at the moment. Unfortunately, I'm completely booked with my own projects.
Hi, and thank you again for being here. And I don't want to butcher her name, but in regards to Lady Kayura, she doesn't have a lot of armor, but I was wondering if you were involved in her creation. And I thought that was really unique as a young girl because we did have Sailor Moon, which is magical girl, but you know, they're all very innocent and ethereal, and it was kind of fun to see an evil, you know, badass chick. And how did that play out?
あれ監督の池田さんからヒロイン女の子の鎧着てキャラクターを出そうっていう話になって僕も、何回かそのキャッチボールやってシュガーさんも書いたりしてで最終的にあの形になったんですよね。でまあ、動かしやすいように鎧やめすごい武装するのはやめたっていう記憶があります。
She actually, that character comes from the director, Ikeda-san, who had plans to introduce a heroine, a female character who could play a big part in the show. And when that was discussed, and it came up a number of times, I would run with the idea and create rough designs. And at the end of all of that work and discussion, she came up with the character design that she ended up with, which does not have much armor, as you noticed, but it's made that way deliberately so that it's really easy for her to move and move quickly, instead of being completely covered and like caked in armor like the other characters sometimes are. She has a more of a lighter armor design.
Hi, yes. I know you helped create the armors. I was also curious if maybe you helped design the weapons they used, and if so, I was wondering what your thought process might have been trying to come up with these weapons and armors and how they would correspond to those characters.
武器もやりましたね。でただアニメなので分かりやすくしなくちゃいけなくて、例えば聖司の鎧っていうのがあれ剣と手裏剣と シコロっていうんですけど、刺す武器なんですけど、それが合体させて剣になってるんです。で、そのバラバラになっちゃうようなところはアニメでは描かれてなかった。設定では書いてある。
I did design the weapons. And when I was designing those weapons, one of the first things you have to consider is that because it's anime, it has to be very visually clear. What the weapon is and what it's doing has to be clear to see for the audience. So, for example, Sage, his sword, his broadsword, that is actually a combined form of a katana and then a shuriken and a spike. And you never see the sword separated into the three forms. But that's actually what it is based on. It's actually the combined form of three weapons, which is why it has that strange shape. I drew a lot of weapons.
So I was also really curious about the process of designing the armor for all of the characters. Who was the most difficult? Like who was just so difficult to really capture the way that you wanted it to look? And which one was your favorite? Which one are you the most proud of? Yeah.
僕はサムライトルパンやる前にデザインメイトっていう会社にいたんですよ。それはJ9 シリーズとかイデオンとか僕の先輩がやってたんですけど、で僕そこの会社を辞めていろんなデザイン会社のコンペがあったんですよ。前にいた会社を駆逐しようと思いまして。でいろんなそのサブのデザイナーとかつけるんですけど、僕は全部一人でやるから宝をスポンサー側に言って、で僕がもしその企画やなんか通らなかったら僕はその場でデザイナー辞めるって言ったんですよ。それでその全部の鎧をデザインしてやって僕が通ってその前の会社はダメになったんですよ。で、それなんで、もう最初からこういうものっていうのを組み立ててあったんで、苦労したものってのはそんなにないです。一番好きなのは、サムライトルーパーのゲストで出てくる顕微鏡っていうのがあるんですけど、それのデザインが自分で決めてます。そうです、そうです。
It was actually somewhat unusual for me to be designing all of the armor that appeared in Ronin Warriors. Usually when a design contract comes through, some of the design would be done by some people, some would be handled by subcontractors of the design company, and it would end up being a lot of people involved. I wanted to do all the designs for this show, all the armor designs. And in fact, I said, if this show tanks, if it's not popular at all, I'll quit as a designer. So it involved me making a pretty big ultimatum in order to do that. But it ended up working out. When I came to design all of the armors, I didn't find any of them particularly hard. There isn't one that I would look at and say that one was really difficult. But the one that I actually really liked doing was the armor for Kim Kyo, who is the minor villain that Ryo receives the swords, the extra special super furious swords from. Different name in dub, Sword, Sky Sword or something.
Yeah, he's also a pervert.
receives the soul swords of fervor from this minor villain. So that minor villain's armor was my one that I really enjoyed designing.
Hmm.
Next question.
You mentioned that, well, here's my question. You can go back in time and change something for the show that you would like to change. What will it be?
All right, so if there's something that I would go back and change about Ronin Warriors, aside from the budget, for example, increasing the budget, I think it would be changing the fighting style a little bit in some of the fight scenes. I am actually a huge fan of chambara movies, which is sword fighting movies, a type of period drama where there's a lot of sword fighting. And in the famous examples of those sword fighting movies, each of the actors has their own way of doing the sword fighting and of taking out and sheathing their swords and carrying their swords. And I would have loved to get some of those nuances and some of those little touches into the show Ronin Warriors. For example, there's a movie called Orochi, which I really love. There's famous actors such as Mifune Toshiro, you may be familiar with, and Shintaro. They all have their own different ways of moving and using the swords when they're involved in fight scenes. Alright, so we've nearly come to the end of our time, and as a special surprise for all of you, we would like to have one round of instant runoff rock, paper, scissors, which some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not. This is to receive an art book that Mr. Okamoto has brought all the way from Japan. So those of you who would like to participate in this game and perhaps win this art book, you would either stand or you would raise your hand to indicate that you are standing. And do rock, paper, scissors against our guest of honor. Those who lose or have those who lose would need to sit down or drop out of the game, and those who are a draw do the same scissors as well as scissors, or who win against him get to stay standing. And we'll just continue that until there's only one person left in the game, and that person will receive the art book. That makes sense to everyone?
Yes.
Okay, so everyone who wants to participate, either stand or raise your hand so that you know that you're in. And I will tell you what he has done as far as rock, paper, scissors. So first of all, you have to start with rock. That's a rule in Japan. So he did scissors. Everyone who had whatever loses against scissors must sit down. Paper. Paper must sit down. All right. Next. Oh, we did paper.
I could.
Throw anything down?
I don't know.
Okay, so 3 people were still up, and she is still up as well.
はい、できます。すいません。じゃんけんぽい。
You did scissors. So rock must sit down. No, wait.
No.
Whatever loses
What?
against scissors must sit down.
Paper.
No one did paper.
So you did stone, so you win, actually, in this last round.
Nice.
これ全部書いてありますので、読んでください。はい。で今これ
Hey.
これをやって
That's super
3でない軸防衛なん
I thought it was going to be like 4 times, and I was like,
I would also like to do a little bit of an advertising announcement for
Yay.
the new show, Jiku Boedan. I have done the rough design for this.
これ今やってますので。
I'm working on it right now. So please look forward to this show.